How's it going, everybody? It's Carpo here. Wanted to talk about psychedelics and hallucinations and illusions. And I sat here for a minute before I started the video trying to think of how am I going to address this. You know, it's such a wide berth of information that that I'd love to share and talk about, but having limited time, going on for hours, of course, might as well write a book or make a video, but in particular, I've always been fascinated with human consciousness and the different viewpoints that we have and how they are affected by psychedelics especially. And you may notice, of course, this is kind of a recurring theme in a lot of my videos, and I talk a lot about consciousness, awareness, and existence because I'm an existential philosopher, I guess. I mean, that's what I think about. I'm always thinking about what does it mean to be human, and what purpose can we create for ourselves, and more or less in the last couple of years, what makes people tick. And in that process, I've learned a lot about myself and other people, and it's helping me to lead a better life. And so that's probably why I share it, because I know that understanding the world helps us to feel more comfortable. When you start learning more about the world, at a point it becomes uncomfortable. And the idea is to overcome that hurdle where you're overwhelmed with information. And I was there like 10 years ago, just like what is this and what is this about? And eventually it calmed down to, after I understood the Zen mentality of things and to laugh things off and to not take things seriously, then pretty much everything just fell away, melted away, all the negativity or, illusions or my grasping or desperation to understand things. But in the process, I'm just loving knowledge. I mean, I just love gaining new insight into things. So it's not like it's ever complete or we're ever finished. So a thought occurred to me earlier as I was going to read some of the notes I took online and elsewhere, and then I realized it was 2 full pages of small print and it's kind of pointless. And I should just consolidate this research and explain exactly where I'm coming from and why this particular information. It's talking about the V1 area of processing of information. And it's this visual cortex, right? There's this crazy, not well understood, there's like 30 different areas that all are basically involved in processing vision. And a lot of folks probably think that our eyes have the retina attached to the back of the head and that it goes into the brain. The fact is that there is no actual visual picture going into the brain. It's all sent as a signal, then our brain decodes it. And so the big question, this gets into like mind-body territory, and the idea that, for example, if somebody has an implant after they've been blind their whole life and they get their vision back, and this has happened, they can see, but they can't process information. And they don't know what they're looking at. It's that spatial awareness we get as we're babies and we're growing up and we're grabbing for a block and we miss it. Eventually we build this picture in our mind of our environment, but it's not just based on what we're actually seeing, but rather what our brain fills in for us. And that part is just amazing, and it's pretty mind-blowing. It's the same way that when you close your mind, you close your eyes, and you close your eyes and you get into your mind's eye, you can actually see a picture in your head. Why? Well, it's produced in the same way. And so the reason why psychedelics amaze me is because, to put it this way, everybody has a different awareness and consciousness. What if you could allow somebody else to see through your reality? Well, that's impossible. That's a paradox that we know, we can't ever do, because the minute you introduce yourself to someone else, they're tainted by their own experience. You can't experience someone else's reality. But what if there was a way that nature could allow us to spontaneously tap into a previous state of mind, or maybe a temporal state of mind, to better understand the mind of nature? So psychedelic psilocybin mushrooms, which grew alongside cows and in various areas near humans, they would ingest these mushrooms and have these experiences that were so profound that explaining them away as just a random high, or, ooh, this got me high, like smoking cannabis or something else, there was something different to it. And modern research is now showing that the way that it acts in your brain It connects areas that aren't ordinarily connected. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of people who are saying it puts you in a higher state of consciousness, which really doesn't do any justice to the actual science. If you look into the actual science that's being done at Johns Hopkins University on psychedelics, you can see that there's far enough materialist information, because that's what science sticks to, is materialist information, that you don't have to go to the metaphysical. But you can't help it, because when you've been there and you've had a psychedelic experience, the awareness is so profound, the understanding of life and the implications of what it means to be a human are so present and so in your face that you walk away with a life-changing experience if you do it right. And that has been my experience several times. And I always fall back to the same idea. What really matters in life? Family, love, understanding, experiences. That's it. It's not about the money or the gain or, but losses are part of it, and that death is part of it, and that keeping all these ideas ever present is what gives us that richness of now, to be able to live in this now while still embracing the future and saying, I want to do this, and understanding how our past has affected our present. A lot of folks, to go back to the mind-body problem, a lot of people, when you discuss consciousness and say, well, could a person have consciousness if they never had any senses when they were born? And I think the closest we can get to that is Helen Keller's situation. But from the reports, she tended to be animalistic until she was taught the water and the water sign, and then she could sign with her hands. But when you really think about it, without our senses, how could we ever develop a consciousness that can think outside of our senses? So, to give you an example, I've discussed this with people and read forums and, various discussions where somebody will say, well, if you just close your eyes, you can go to a place of nothingness when you're meditating and really not use your senses, but you're still there. And after thinking that through, I think, but you're only still there because you have a consciousness to draw on from previous experiences. You're aware that you're in this space because you know that space exists. So if you never learned that, you never understood it, then how could you ever experience anything? If you couldn't learn, you couldn't think. And that's one of those conundrums people, disagree and debate about. Like, well, if you never learned anything, can you actually formulate coherent thoughts and make plans? And, unfortunately, many of the cases which determine that have been feral children and other issues like that, where people have been separated from society for a long time, or since birth. So what it comes down to is, are there any original thoughts? Can you have an original thought? In other words, it seems that every single thing we can think up, no matter how amazing, is based on previous people before us or previous ideas before us. So it's hard to kind of picture, but really try to picture what it would be like to come up with an original idea that wasn't based on anything else. Even on an original theory, these things are so difficult to imagine. It's like picturing a different color. How could it exist if we can't see it? But in the mind's eye, you can see some things that are pretty interesting. They can't be explained. They can't be proven. They can't be documented. But the psychedelic experience is so strong, they instill that, at least within me. So can there be form without senses? Can the self exist without senses? I'm not sure. But psychedelic awareness tends to just, once again, draw on our previous experiences, just like a profound awareness, or, tapping into another part of ourselves that maybe we've let go. And it's shown that there's a lot more activity with LSD in the visual cortex than normal, a lot more blood flow, rather. And so that would make sense and explain a lot of the visuals that we have. It seems that psychedelics, they sort of lift the veil, if you will. And a lot of folks tend to scoff at that and believe it's just an illusion and everything you feel and learn is just your hallucinations, which I agree with. But the question is, since we are only processing what our brains think that we see anyway, and so many people hallucinate on a regular basis, who's to say that any of this is any more real than any of the experiences we've had on these substances? DMT, for example, can send you to a place that is inexplainable, inexpressible. It's some sort of profound space that can't be defined. And to me, it's not a useful tool for self-exploration, but that's why longer-acting psychedelics like psilocybin have so much benefit, in my opinion. But, you know, we think about human nature. One of the fascinating things in this paper, when it was talking about the how people have what they call visual agnosia, and that's where you can see people's faces, or buildings, or stereos. You can see everything totally clearly with your eyes, and you're aware that you're looking at something, but your brain cannot process it. It's not like it's blurry, but your brain can't process it and tell you what it is. And that some people can sit in a room and trace a picture perfectly and copy it, and then look at it and not even know what it is. Or draw a picture of something outside and not even know what it is. And that's pretty amazing. And certain types of nerve damage can cause people to especially have issues identifying food and having sexual related behaviors. So some people will even eat pebbles and not even realize that they're eating pebbles and not food. And it's interesting because they believe this is because it taps into our primal circuit first when we have this type of damage to our brain, because food and sex are the primal urges. So if everything else starts to shut down, we're going to revert into primal mode, if you will. I'm sure there's more to it than that, but what it does show is that there's separate circuits for this system that are affected more than others, and it must be devastating for people who are, you know, have a husband or wife who has visual agnosia. So I'm going to try to flip through this and see. Yeah, it says with visual agnosia, people have a hard time discriminating between some people, objects with different shapes, even though they can perceive color and motion. And some people have color blindness that are yeah, okay. Vision, okay, then it goes on to this other part that talks about photoreception, and how this amazed me because, and I have to put this, how long is this video? It's already getting long, but we think that we see with the eyes, and a lot of people will talk about the pineal gland and melatonin, and of course these things are affected. We did evolve from creatures that developed photoreceptors on their head, and eventually we developed eyeballs. A lot of people tend to think that eyes can't be reduced, but they can. That's the thing. The eyes don't do the seeing. They are just the suggestion, the signal, if you will. So, this part about the photoreceptors, they found out that, and the reason why I looked this part up was because I was fascinated. When I was in a pitch black tent one time, I don't remember, I was camping or something, and I had my eyes closed, and I moved my hand in front of my face, and I thought, oh my god, I can see my hand, that's weird. Am I just high? You know, and then this continued over the years. I'd try it all the, you know, whenever I was in pitch blackness. And I always assumed maybe there's a tiny bit of light that's allowing me to see my hand. But no, I did it in a pitch black room, and I could still see the outline of my hand passing in front of my eyes. So the research that was done on this, when I found out about this, it's they call it Spelunkers Illusion or something, because, you know, spelunking is cave diving, and cavers have experienced this and reported this. And so they did an experiment with a whole bunch of 129 people, and all of them claimed to see the movement when they moved their own hand, but not when the instructor did it in front of them. And this doesn't show that we're seeing any magic hand in front of us. What it's showing is that our brain perceives things that we know to be there. And so when something moves in front of our face, and it's part of our own body, our brain knows that it's part of our body and therefore creates the illusion of seeing it. And this is pretty amazing, because it means that it may be similar to the way that people who are blind that use echolocation perceive things. That the way that, you know, these shadows can be formed perhaps just by them hearing it and their brain picking up and knowing the shape and size of what it is. The brain will pick up on some amazing things. I mean, if we lose one sense, it will develop, of course, you know, the other senses will become, you know, go into hyperdrive. One of the other fascinating things that, before I forget, is the visual cortex thing, is that your eyes can actually, they have these photoreceptors that are in your, I believe, right in front of your eyes, by your tear ducts. And they found this in rodents and in humans, and, you know, recently have found that they can actually tell your brain if there's light or not. So even if your eyes don't work, not only your skin can tell, because of course you have photoreceptors in your skin, and, you know, vitamin A and whatnot, or is it D? Anyhow, I think it was vitamin D that sunlight gives you, but vitamin A is something that your body has something to do with how your body perceives light. Anyhow, we're amazing creatures, and we have a lot of different senses is the point. So, since our brains can rewire themselves permanently to see things in a different way, which benefits us if we have a problem with one of our senses. And why is it so hard for us to believe that taking a psychedelic that's been with us for a long time could perhaps temporarily alter the pathways of our brain in a way that is coherent and functional, not disorganized, chaotic, and just a bunch of noise in the brain, but rather a purposeful or at least structured understanding of something deeper within ourselves, perhaps seeing part of ourselves that we didn't know existed. And in my experience and many others, that's exactly what happens. I was trying to think of a metaphor for psychedelics earlier, and I was thinking if the brain is the hard drive, then psychedelics would be the restore point. It would be a way of when your brain is scrambled and everything's falling apart and your files are disorganized, you hit that restore button and it puts you back to a previous state of mind, only this one may be even more primal than we realize. Do I believe the stoned ape theory by Terence McKenna, that it was psychedelics that gave us consciousness and gave rise to culture? No, of course not. Psychedelics come in many different forms, many different areas, probably didn't consume them. This awareness is in us all. It's not that the psychedelics are needed to develop the awareness. It's that in a fast-paced, busy society like we have today, it gives us a glimpse into ourselves that we may not get elsewhere. So, I had a stack of books that I was going to mention here, but I figure it's pointless. The one I did want to show was one of the most fascinating books to me was Hallucinations by Oliver Sacks. And it gives a complete rundown on all the different types of visual disruptions and hallucinations and a disturbing amount of people who have some of these issues. And I guess I'll just flip through them real quick. This is 6 Impossible Things Before Breakfast. The Evolutionary Origins of Belief. This one is Nature and Psyche by David Kidner. Radical Environmentalism and the Politics of Subjectivity. And it starts off attacking people like myself, which is why I'm reading it. And Weird Things by Michael Shermer. That guy can be kind of a chump, but he's a pretty smart dude. I haven't read that one yet. And the last one is Oliver Sacks, again, Musicophilia. And this one is directly related to visual hallucinations, which is something I just covered, but there's audio hallucinations, and they are much more common. Hearing voices, and it's pretty amazing what the mind can do. And I've known people who have had issues where they've heard voices and had to overcome this, negative voices especially, and it seems to be something that comes from in times of stress and anxiety in our lives. And in the past, it's just, amazing how much ignorance we had about these things. And, we thought people were possessed by demons, and the same with hallucinations. People who had visual disruptions were witches, and they were burned at the stake, and there was so much killing over ignorance and misunderstanding. So I think that understanding why people have these distortions, and that just because a person has a hallucination that they're not totally crazy, those are important things, but also that people who take psychedelics have a deeper insight into their own psyche if they allow the tools to be used properly. And that means not just taking acid and going to a party and dancing and laughing, but sitting back in a closed, dark area with some good music and just pondering your life, or whatever works for you. So, if anything, the conclusion I've come to is that love really is everything. It really is. And if you don't have love in your life, then you will find any way to get that. It's programmed within our psyche. If you already have family in your life, you're much more likely to want to protect and defend that way of life. But those of us who don't have love have a harder time admitting as much. I'm not going to say that I'm speaking for everyone, for sure, but the one last thing I'd like to say, especially about boys, men in our culture, is that unfortunately a lot of us kind of go stir crazy, go nuts, because not completely nuts, but we have no rites of passage, and we're starting to ignore the male need for rites of passage. And we can look at our ancestors as, oh, well, they were just ignorant. You know, we don't need to send boys out on hunting parties on their 18th birthday or have them do this or that. No, we don't need to. But men want it. And I thought of that because psychedelic rituals were a major rite of passage for certain cultures, male and female. But we all know that the males tend to have a more aggressive approach, and so tend to need a more aggressive ritual or rite of passage. You know, some cultures, there's a culture that, you know, they tie you up and they sting you with 100 red ants that are like carefully tied to this board. I mean, there are so many horrible things, and you think, how primal and how ignorant, but then you realize, you know, you're growing up in a tough world. You need to be tough in it. It builds character, it builds understanding. So I just wanted to add that thought that, you know, for me, psychedelics were a rite of passage, and they allowed me to see myself more clearly. And I take it for granted quite often, because sometimes I meet somebody who is just so ignorant and so out of touch with, you know, anything remotely rational, that I think, I'm losing faith in people, that, you know, there's just no hope for humanity. And then I watch a couple of intelligent people, not just intelligent people, but intelligent, normal people. What I consider normal. People are able to just have a normal conversation, laugh a little, oh yeah, you know, show their emotions, be honest and be themselves. There's a lot of them out there, you know. A lot of good people. So I'm going to hold out hope. Maybe psychedelic research will open up something about ourselves, but I think by analyzing our own hallucinations and delusions and illusions, that's one of the greatest ways to overcome our ignorance, and pointing the finger at each other and saying, you're wrong, you're wrong. We really do perceive the world through different lenses. But there are facts that we need to agree on, and so here we are at the crossroads of life. I'll talk to y'all later. Going out to watch Spider-Man with my son, my 9-year-old son. So we haven't gone to a movie in years, so hopefully it'll be fun, and I'll see some visual illusions on the big screen.